Hello and good afternoon, and really welcome today, and thank you so much for joining. We're really glad you could join us for our second instalment for the We Need to Talk series. I'm Sonia Gandhi, I'm Head of Social Value for MasTech, and I'm your host for the session. I'm really excited to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker today is Gavin Johnson, who's the Home Office Cross-Government Digital Sustainability Steering Group Lead. And that's a tongue twister. So if you ever need to have a different one from seashells on the seashores, it's that. Our second speaker is Keith Jones. He's the Chief Technical Officer for our Secure Government Services within MasTech. And our third speaker is Gareth Edwards, who's the Chief Client Officer at Go Code Green. What we're going to do before I ask them to speak, if that's okay, I'm going to launch a poll question. So if you can, vote through, and we'll launch a poll question now. Bear with me while we actually get the technology sorted. And I'm just confirming everyone can still hear me as well. Okay, so feel free to respond. So the results are coming in at the moment. So what's really interesting to note is that there's a pretty even switch between yes and no, that they're not feeling awarned, but there's probably about 50%, 60% on the call are actually somewhat understand. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, you will have moved a little bit the nose into somewhat and somewhat's into a little bit yes. Fully informed is a little bit of a misnomer, but we'll go with it at the moment. So what I'd like to do now is ask Gavin to talk a little bit about, first of all, if you could introduce who you are, your background within the Home Office, and why you feel sustainability is important.
Thank you very much, Sonia. So, yeah, a bit further about myself. So, I'm the Home Office Cross-Government Digital Sustainability Lead, which means I sit on a group with other government departments, sharing best practice across digital sustainability. I've got a degree in environmental science. I have in the past life been a chartered environmentalist, and I've delivered a wide range of projects and programmes for both the Environment Agency and DEFRA. These days, I'm currently working in Home Office, so I deliver IT programmes and projects. So in terms of the challenge that we have in government is that there is a well-proven link between burning fossil fuels and climate change. And climate change is a concern to the UK government and many other people, citizens of the UK. It manifests itself in many ways, but we've got a cross-government agreement from political parties that we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. There have been a number of high-profile meetings across government departments and across countries, and led to the Climate Change Act of 2008, where UK government committed to net zero by 2050, and that's bringing it down to 100%, bringing down our emissions to what we had in 1990. So if we look at the graphs and emissions, they've gone up steadily over the years. Commitments of 2008 were to reduce that. And there's been very much a focus historically by the governments to achieve that on looking at estates and looking at transport and others. And in some ways, I think that the digital elements, the IT elements has been neglected in the past. It's not so much being neglected now, and it's well recognised that IT is a significant contributor to the greenhouse gases. With that in mind, there are various agendas to try and improve that. In terms of that scale of that, I've put it into, in other words, the current theories are that around 4% of greenhouse gas emissions come from ICT. That's on par with the aviation industry. And from what we look at generally, people are considering, do I catch a plane? Can I use public transport? Can I use a train to get from A to B? But they don't necessarily think about, do I switch on the IT services? What's the impact of that IT service if I bring something new into digital? And that's something we need to change. And this is where we really need our supply chain to support us. So in the Home Office, we have a digital sustainability strategy. One of those pillars really is about how we use the supply chain. Other pillars revolve around our own staff being educated, bringing up on the learning, on the journey, what we can do internally as individuals, but also in our projects and programs. And that's going right across the Home Office, but also it's a practice that we see right across other government departments. So leaning on our supply chain, we spend a lot of money with our supply chain, and they are a fantastic resource to use to deliver that change for us in the Home Office, to deliver our digital sustainability strategy, and also across the other departments. So that's a summary of where we are in terms of the challenge. Just one other linkage into that. So climate change manifests itself in many ways. One of the things that we see is temperature rises and hotter summers, and some of those summers we see challenges with that in terms of increased violence and social unrest in our streets. So Stockport riots, for example, took place when we had very high temperatures in the north and across the UK. Other unrest has happened in other countries, and there's a link between civil unrest, as we see, and high temperatures. And there's many reasons behind that, but it's just something we've got to bear in mind. As climate change takes place, we'll see those linkages. Equally, if we're using resources in acquiring new data centres and putting a lot of money in infrastructure into IT, we'll also see a linkage there into rare earth minerals. We'll also inject into conflict, which leads into armed conflict sometimes, migration and illegal migration, and that causes a challenge to our border. So the Home Office is certainly impacted, and it's a priority that's recognised by our team at Exco that we need to be in the Home Office. We need to be tackling certainly sustainability and addressing our emissions is one of the things that we need to spend more time on. It's not as high up there as small boats and violence against women and girls, but it certainly is a priority recognised by our exec team. Thank you.
And I think that's the fascinating thing, though, Gavin, because until I spoke to you a while back, I didn't actually even do the direct correlation between the climate change and the civil unrest. And just to find that out is just, it makes logical sense. Yeah. And that's so we don't always know how climate change impacts us on a day-to-day basis. And that's probably why we need to have more of these type of talks and webinars and open discussions. And it's great to hear that it's one of the priorities and dealing with it as we go forward. And I do feel that that's the point as well, that we are on par with the aviation industry, but nobody thinks twice about asking a question for ChatGPT, downloading streaming your Wi-Fi and everything else. So that's one of the things that we need to look at. And we know that as a technology industry, we're only going to increase in our work with AI and our generative AI as well. So how do we balance the need for more technology with civil unrest? If you wanted to, let's remove the climate change and do civil unrest. Keith is our CTO, Chief Technical Officer for our Secure Government Services, and I know, Keith, you and I worked a lot on this one, and I'd really like to invite you to speak. First of all, if you could introduce yourself and sort of tell us why you're interested in this type of work and what we're doing within Mastec to support the Home Office.
Thank you, Sonia. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see so many people on the call. Just some background. So I'm CTO, as Sonia mentioned, for Secure Government Services in Mastec. I've been with Mastec a couple of years this time around, but have a previous tour with them a few years ago. And I've been in the IT industry for coming up for 40 years. So I've seen an enormous amount of change over that time, particularly over the last few years, with much more focus, rightly, in terms of driving sustainable solutions into the market, particularly around further adoption of cloud services, adoption of native cloud, and all the benefits that can bring. But equally, a lot more maturity and development of the processes, the approaches that have been taken and are further evolving in the marketplace to start to fundamentally drive sustainable services across government and into private sector as well. So good to meet you all virtually. As an organisation, we work across a lot of major public sector programmes, and many of those are critical national infrastructure services. And many of them, I'm sure you'd recognise, with challenges in balancing major transformational change, often with very, very tight budgetary challenges and constraints, while also fully embracing sustainability as a core aspect of the deliveries. And I see that across most of what we do. It's an inherent challenge for trying to fully embed sustainable services with our customers, but meeting the needs for delivering really critical, complex services, digital services into government. In my experience, the passion to do this for everyone involved is absolutely there. Driving sustainable services, driving improvements in reducing our carbon footprint. But often that prioritization in terms of the broader delivery demands is often challenging, and certainly from my point of view, often frustrating in terms of how we can drive some of that evolvement of services going forward. I think one of the critical to the questions being put to us about how we balance maintaining velocity against actually driving sustainability. I think one of those critical factors in enabling fully sustainable services is to fundamentally embed it across the full delivery lifecycle. I've certainly often seen, even recent times, it's seen as part of innovation or continuous improvement initiatives within clients and with suppliers, rather than actually doing, making it integral to what we do as a supplier community and delivering complex services to our customers. In support of this ethos, and this resonates with what Gavin was talking about earlier, just in terms of the supply chain of working with the supplier community and their SMEs. We're as a company, we're globally investing in our people. I'm working in the UK with Gareth and Go Code Green in particular to train our architects, delivery teams in green design principles, green ops, just getting the fundamentals in terms of changing the culture and mindset that we can then bring to our clients in terms of how we deliver that change. And we're actively embedding these principles into our solution design and services, right from the initial requirements capture, which I think is another critical thing, rather than having it to be an addendum to the service requirements, starting to get all of these requirements built in right at the beginning of the design. Requirements capture phase is really critical because I think from that flows the general culture and mindset in terms of delivering greener services. I think fundamental to that, it's really important that we start to fully integrate relevant green KPIs across the delivery lifecycle. I think that drives behaviors, mindsets. We're establishing great initial baseline targets agreed with the customer, and even more importantly, we then have a data-driven and measurable insights we can use to drive continuous improvements across the lifetime of the contract or the service. So I think that's critical in terms of we start to get much more metrics-driven capability to understand not just where we are, as a collective set of organizations, but equally where the opportunities for further improvements are going down the line, and then embracing new technologies, new services, new capabilities, approaches as we go down that journey. And whilst there's enormous opportunities, with the design approaches, the technology, the tooling, I think one of the most important factors for me is partnership. As an organization, in some respects, we're still quite early in our sustainability journey. And I think that's true for many of us, whether it's our customers or others in the industry. It's a broad and complex space, a lot of challenges, as I said earlier, just in terms of how you start to truly make significant step changes in terms of how sustainability is managed across a complex digital service at scale. I think that's one of the reasons we partner with Go Code Green, as they bring enormous experience in decarbonising digital solutions, and that's helping us accelerate our learning and development, and therefore helping our customers as part of that journey as well. And it's a two-way street. I think with our customers, we're providing further insights back into Go Code Green to support evolving their solutions, their approaches, and the fundamentals of how they're supporting the industry in terms of driving some of these often challenging aspects in terms of delivering, particularly on the technology space, benefits from a sustainability point of view. And I think probably for most of you, we work in complex multi-supplier environments, and generally my experience is sustainability initiatives not always, but are often within individual suppliers' delivery silos. They're very much being delivered by the contract scope for that particular supplier or set of suppliers. I think one of the step changes we, as an industry, can make is to drive more collaborative approaches and how we collectively evolve standard solutions to sustainability across the programs. So particularly getting a lot more reuse, standardization about those approaches that we can share across government. As mentioned earlier, the cross-government factors of this, I think there's an enormous opportunity to share those learnings, share and reuse artifacts, capabilities, to start to bring together a coalesced view about how we drive sustainability in the market overall. And from a Mastech point of view, we're like many organizations, we're actively integrating sustainability principles across everything we do, our services, both internally and with our customers. That includes things like our AI board, to Sonia's earlier comment around AI and some of the challenges around that relating to sustainability. We've got massive opportunity in the marketplace to enable major business change with AI, but we've also got to ensure that we're responsibly designing and industrializing our AI solutions. So we're minimizing carbon footprints as part of our approach. As those services scale out, And as I say, I think there's a massive opportunity in terms of doing that, but we've got to really be focused on terms of embedding sustainability within that approach as well, inherent to what we're doing as an organization. And as an organization, we're absolutely committed to ongoing investment in all aspects of sustainability. And we're working very closely with customers and the rest of the industry, including the likes of AWS, to drive improvements in how we maintain delivery velocity for critical customer requirements, but maximizing the opportunities to reduce carbon footprint in our services. And I think in summary, we're building and evolving sustainability solutions, but it's rapidly changing space with a lot of new approaches, tools, techniques coming into the industry every day. I think taking a collaborative partnership approach, I think, is one of the critical factors in how we're fully embedding sustainability into our services, collaboratively across public sector, not just in our own contract areas. And ultimately, from a personal perspective, I think we're doing this because it's the right thing to do for our customers and for the environment. So thank you all, and look forward to the rest of the session.
Thank you, Keith. And just to reiterate what you've said, so previously, as a standard company, we would look at our sustainability being within our facilities, our actual buildings, make sure we use green energy. We would look at recycling. We would actually ask others to perhaps even drive your electric cars. And then the session we had last year with Go Code Green was looking at how we could change our behaviors, look at how we used our email management on personal aspects. And as a company, we've taken a step change from looking at personal behaviors and environmental considerations and where we are, who we do and how we do it, to looking at how we deliver our products. So whether that's cloud-based or data-based products and how we deliver that one. And I think that's the most important step change that we've got at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do think that this is where we are absolutely fortunate to be partnering with the likes of Go Code Green, who, before you talk, Gareth, I'm just going to say a few nice things about you, and it's a good job it's being recorded because I may never say it again, is that we've been blessed to work with Gareth and the whole team within Go Code Green. They are immensely talented industry leaders within this area, and we're able to discuss with them any of our clients. So when Gavin has a particular issue with a transformational project, we were able to bring in Go Code Green, and we can do a scoping to sort of see where we can actually reduce carbon usage within the data program we're delivering. And then we can work with Gavin and the team to actually make sure that actually happens. Now, we can't do it alone. We have to have our partners alongside of it, whether that's our client side, like the Gavin and the Home Office and other NHS or anyone else, or whether it's having industry leaders like Go Code Green. We have to sort of work together to build the innovation and make it, as you said, Keith, not just an add-on, but fundamental to what we actually deliver. And I have to say, I've been with Mastech for 3 years. I love the change that we're doing. So we've been through the education part. We've looked at how we can do keep our house in order. And now that we've got that going, we're looking how we can actually work to make sure our products deliver sustainability initiatives at the same time. We can't do any of it without the huge brains with Gareth and his team. So with that very neat introduction, go for it, Gareth.
Thank you, Sonia. Unfortunately, the huge brains are elsewhere engaged, and the person who colours in for a living is going to talk to you about it. So yeah, I'm Gareth Ibbotson, Chief Client Officer of Go Code Green. The joy of working for a small business, you get to create your own title to cover many sins. I've worked in digital technology for 25 plus years, and very much both as a client, largely in financial services, and latterly for some of the big four. I'm delivering the kind of big kind of digital transformation you might expect, both in government and the private sector. And for the last 3 years, found myself working in this area of tech sustainability. And I think it's interesting that when Gavin spoke earlier, he talked about aviation industry, and it's something we talk about quite a lot because it's part of our job is to make this area of tech sustainability relatable to things that people already understand and everyone understands. Flying's bad for us. I love the old adage of lies, damn lies, and statistics, because the statistic we use is something like it's actually 2 to 3 times greater impact than aviation, depending on where you get your numbers. Largely, aviation's remained pretty static in its emissions, and there's a ton of reasons for that. Big one being money. They like making it, and as it turns out, being more sustainable, being more efficient, equates to bigger profits. And we've got some stuff to learn from that in the tech industry. But that kind of real focus on the details. And if you look at aviation these days, we would all argue we don't take as much luggage as we used to. The planes are a bit more aerodynamic, the fuel gets them a little bit further. So there's a ton of reasons why the aviation industry's emissions have kind of stayed pretty static. Whilst we've all gone a bit mad. And there's loads of reasons for that. We all use technology more every day, the devices are more prevalent, all of that is really important. But we've also removed a lot of the constraints that we used to have around the technology industry. Super fast broadband, we didn't used to have dial-up. That enabled us to deliver richer, more, richer experiences, which can contain a lot more content. But we actually now need to kind of pedal back a little bit and start to triage our approach to delivering new technology and start to understand the consequences of what we're going to deliver before we do it. And that's what we focus on at Go Code Green. So they don't know us. We have a series of measurement tooling, which both retrospectively measure the impact of the technology you've got, but also to help you predict the impact of the technology you're about to build. It's very difficult to separate software and hardware. You can measure each individually, but fundamentally, poorly optimized software is going to impact your hardware and how much energy it uses. And for us, when we look at the most important things to do, there's probably two areas of focus that are really important for us. Measurement. It's very easy to look at the sustainability space and say, we've moved to cloud, job done, walk away, because cloud's green. But as anyone who knows who works in the FinOps space will tell you, they don't really understand what their bill is going to be month to month, year to year, because cloud usage goes up and down. So their predicted emissions are very hard to predict. And also, where's the energy coming from? Do we trust that it's all green energy? And if you go and dig around, I'm sure you can all find a statistic which will tell you how many green data centers are on the planet. And I can tell you it's significantly less than 1%. So cloud isn't necessarily the easy answer. And in fact, if you look more broadly at the industry, you'll find, particularly in the private sector, people moving back to on-prem, building their own microgrids. They're starting to understand that cloud isn't necessarily the future. So really understanding where your emissions are coming from and how green they really are is super important. Measure your software, predict the impact of it, and understand whether cloud is the right answer for you or not. And I think the second thing is people. As much as we want to talk about the impact of AI, and we're all going to be using ChatGPT to do all our coding. The big levers in tech sustainability and green IT are the choices we make early on in a project, the engineering choices we make, where we're going to host it, what language we're going to use to deliver it, the kind of our approach to DevOps, our approach to the number of CPUs we use when we deploy a particular piece of software. The early choice Keith talked about it being the service design choices we make, baking in sustainability from the start. They're all the big levers that you can deploy in sustainable IT. So training, awareness, massively important. And this is, as much as I would like to argue it's becoming a mass market issue, general public isn't really aware of the impact of the technology in the space as yet. And it's still a conversation, over a coffee, over a beer, over dinner with friends, that I can still shock people with the growing impact of technology. And that's today's technology. That's not tomorrow's technology. And by tomorrow's technology, I mean really the growing impact of Gen AI. And the shift that we're seeing already in the market, which you'll hear the people at OpenAI talking about, you'll hear people at Google talking about, where people are using some of these large-scale LLMs like the research engine, yet not really understanding that a query in ChatGPT uses 10 times more electricity than a Google search. Are you getting a better answer? Are you getting a more trustworthy answer? That's debatable, but is the cost worth it? And I don't think yet there's enough conversation about that kind of cost of that transaction in terms of emissions and electricity. Green electricity or not, we should be looking at waste. And I think even if every watt of electricity we were consuming was coming from a green source, it still costs money to generate. And there's a spend part of this conversation when we look at sustainable technology, which is if we build green applications long term, we will spend less money. And that's particularly in the government sector, got to be good for all of us. We can spend less money in the delivery of all these amazing technology services that Gavin and his colleagues are delivering, then some of that money can go back to frontline services or other ways of using that money. And I think that's for us, is that kind of double-edged sword of save emissions, save some money, terrifically important. And I think what's great for me, working alongside Mastec and other partners, is the focus that I've seen from UK government on this space. As Gavin's talked about, the fact that there's like these kind of committees in place is terrifically important. The fact that every kind of technology application response requires a focus on emissions is terrifically important, and it's forcing us all to think about it. And there's every month and every year there's new legislation coming down the line, which is going to put a hyper focus on this, because we do know that legislation, regulation is the thing that drives the behaviours fastest in this space. So sometimes it is going to be the carrot and sometimes it's going to be the stick. But for us, supporting our partners in Mastec and supporting government, it's measure, understand your impact before you go make it, and raise awareness across the board of your people with these kind of sessions, but also with that kind of detailed training. So we know that next batch of software engineers, that next batch of architects that Keith talked about, are making the right choices as they go on to continue building new applications which benefit us.
Thanks, Gareth. That was really, really insightful and helpful as well, and it really does set the picture perfectly. I have to say that when you helped us host a webinar last May, you shared some slides, and I still use those slides and that information, which was every time you ask a question of ChatGPT, you use a 500 ml bottle of water to cool the data centers. And whenever I tell people that, they seem really shocked at it. They get quite like, oh my goodness, this is dreadful. But we don't know, you don't know what you don't know, but sharing the information is so important. And I still remember the other fact you said, we probably have to update the song in the information, but I think it was the Olivia Rodrigo's driving license song was downloaded so many times that you could fly from London to New York something like 4,000 times or something. And that was brilliant. And I know that colleagues who we spoke to afterwards who drive quite a lot, who haven't managed to persuade them to get an EV car, they download their playlists now as opposed to streaming it. So every little bit happens. And I do think that's the key point. If you know what the issue is, if you're made aware of where you can make any changes, we can work together to do it. And I really do love the collegiate collaborative working between the Home Office and other government departments, ourselves and our competitors. We're not the only ones doing this, and industry leaders like Go Code Green as well. It does make a huge difference on how we can change the future and have it, design a sustainable future, as our title is. That's the end of the actual presentations. Before I start the Q&A, and thank you so much for those who've already asked the questions, could you, we have one last poll question just to measure if the understanding. So we'll just set the poll question again, and then I'll start asking the questions. So as those results are coming through. Okay, so it's, the first 30 people to respond are the ones I want to go with. Anyone else who says no after this one, we're not taking your response. That's how it works in my house. We take the good news. So that's brilliant. So at least what we're doing today has made a difference, even if we haven't actually prevented any riots, Gavin, and we haven't saved any money just at the moment. What we have been able to do is influence some change as we go through. Right, because we have muted and taken the cameras off of anyone else, so bear with me while I read out the questions. And perhaps this one, I think, if Gavin and Keith could have a quick response to, how do we balance the demands of needing to use more technology and more AI with the increased use of carbon and water? Gavin, do you want to?
Yeah. So I think there really is a place for AI. There is a case to do it. It's not shouldn't use AI. There are some fantastic values and fantastic benefits. For example, using an AI to help write a risk assessment for delivering a program or a project, you can get a really good piece of work done, which would have taken days of work to formulate that table of your key risks and your strategies to deal with those risks using AI. Equally, to write a business case, a starter for 10, you can ask the AI to generate a business case for a particular product you're after, and it can do it and save yourself a lot of time and effort and money in doing so. It's not the answer. It's always got to have that human own time, but there are real uses and benefits to it. The other side is there are cases, as Gareth said, for where you shouldn't be using. If you can use a Google search to get your answer, you should be using that. We've got to be careful and mindful how we use AI. It has its benefits, and we need to be cognizant of what the impact is of using it on the environment and think about that at the same time. Thank you.
Keith, did you want to come in on that one, or Gareth?
Yeah, I echo what Gavin's saying. I mean, I think a lot of this, and what Gareth was saying earlier, you've got to take a very holistic view, for some of these use cases in terms of truly understanding the total impact, because it's, for some of these use cases, it's relatively simplistic to do a proof of concept which shows the business operational value, but you've got to start linking back that deep understanding of actually what's the sustainability impact in doing that. And to Gavin's point, that potentially or does generally require maturity in things like FinOps, etc. for cloud services. There's a much broader picture there. So when we're starting to go down that journey, you've got to get a much more holistic viewpoint and start to actually put measurable metrics within the services to actually start to assess those. So I think it's a much broader picture in terms of how you impact from a full life cycle, delivering a feature or a new capability, new solution into a client.
Just to build on that, Keith, quickly, I think the answer to any question can't be AI, and I think that's. In a previous life, I was presented with we bought IBM Watson. What's the question? And we had to go and find a use for it. So that tends to, at the moment, we're very humanist, we're very magpies. We like the new shiny thing. We want to go into and go use it. In most cases, work to enable AI to do its job well requires a huge significant amount without creating structured data so it works well, and actually we haven't done the machine learning bit first before we go and deploy the AI. So the brilliant, I'm always a big fan of brilliant basics. There's lots of answers that are the right answer before we get to then overlaying the AI, and to Gavin's point, there's some amazing use cases for that. But let's start with what's the question we're trying to get an answer to and work through it methodically as we would. And I think the other thing I would say is Mastech's doing a lot of work on this space with their new AI board, the right frameworks, right? All technology needs the proper governance, proper decision-making forums, proper throughput to make sure you're making the right long-term decisions that are strategic, not just tactical. So I'm putting the right governance, the right framework around things so you can make the decisions that knows this is a better answer whilst it's using this much electricity, this much water. It's the right answer for all of us for these reasons. So that's got to be the way.
Thank you all. I think this question is actually for you, Gareth. It's from Anthony. How difficult is it to track and measure the components that contribute towards sustainability goals, and what solutions can we use to perform these tasks? I think this is talking about some of your products.
Am I allowed to directly sell stuff here?
Of course you can.
So at GoCrook, we built a series of solutions to do this. I think the point is it's all about your data maturity. So looking backwards is definitely harder than looking forwards. That probably makes a lot of sense to you. When we talk about the measurement of applications, if you do so you capture the right data, when you start building a new application or designing a new application, it becomes very simple. What's much harder is to go back retrospectively and capture that information. We still do that, and we work with clients to make sure that they can retrospectively understand the impact of old applications. They know what they can learn from it, but B, they can mitigate the impact of legacy applications which aren't necessarily going anywhere. And that's obviously hugely important, particularly with older big mainframe applications. And we typically work side by side with clients to make sure we understand where that data is going to come from. It typically sits in most organizations in things like a CMDB or a ServiceNow or those types of applications, captures most of that data. What we can't do is ignore bits of data and come up with rough answers. The measurement frameworks for doing this are in line with the measurement frameworks for measuring the impact of any product. So all based on the GHG protocols and the ISO standards that are governing this space. determine what data we need to do measurement, and we typically work with clients to do that, and we've built all the kind of componentry to integrate and measure those applications. But as I said, much easier to start looking forward and say, let's capture all these data points and measure the impact of the net new.
And I will say that we love using the products, and I sell your products on your behalf as well to my teams
Sometimes
going
without
forward.
telling us.
Without telling you as well sometimes, but they do work. And I know that Gavin, in particular, the scoping project that we looked at the CEDA tool to look at how they scoped and to move through from there. So I hope that answers your question, Anthony. There's a question. Sorry, Gavin.
On the metrics side, it's just we in government we have to report on our emissions, and that goes across our estates side of the business as well as our IT side. So we have to report on the IT side to DEFRA, or it has been to DEFRA in the past. It's going to now move to Cabinet Office directly, and so we can get that rich picture. Again, the quality of the data varies over previous years, but one of the things is to try and improve that metrics. It doesn't help us to fine-tune a service and reduce the impact on the service, but that's the end goal, that we'll be able to understand that's the impact on this service. By changing this, we can see the improvements. But how can we measure change if we can't measure the metrics behind it? So that's something we're really keen to work with our suppliers on, getting the right metrics so we can report directly into Cabinet Office and DEFRA, but equally so that we can improve the services we deliver.
And that's something, Keith, that we need to work on as the supplier for the products, to make sure that we embed the measurement material internally within it, I guess. Before I ask you to comment on that, if that's okay, because I think there are other questions coming through. There's a question from Gayatri. I think, Gavin, perhaps if we could start with you on this one as well. She hopes we're all doing well. We understand our AI and sustainability, ESG. But can you elaborate from your perspective how it affects social and governance aspects? Because it's not just about environment only. Although I understand how it majorly increases environmental footprint as a cost, as well as cost, how can we minimize the impact created on social and governance aspects? I think this is alluding perhaps to the climate change and the social riots, but if there's anything else, how can we elaborate from the perspective and how it impacts on that?
For me, delivering any program or projects, my bread and butter is delivery. And as a program manager or previously a project manager, we're always looking at what going through governance change. There's a huge amount of governance. All I need to see in my organisation is a bit more change in terms of the sustainability lens put on anything we deliver from that aspect. So we look quite heavily at security, particularly with the data sets we handle, very sensitive data sets. There needs to be more of a lens on the sustainability side. What is the impact? And that's that hard part. What does it cost to stand up a new service? What is the impact going to be on that? What is an end user transaction from, you can be applying for an MOT license, getting all those elements through is sometimes very hard to measure. And I have an understanding at the outset of a business case where it's going to end up at the end run. And I think the likes of the work that Gareth's doing and those baselines that we're getting through, the work yourselves doing in delivery, really helps us to fine tune where we go in the future. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but certainly it's an area that we have to do more work on.
I know just in my position as head of social value that there are huge connections between environmental aspects and actual well-being. So we all know that, when the weather is comfortable enough but not too hot for riots, Gavin, but there are nature aspects, the biodiversity is good, and the food technology and supplies are happening quietly. It makes life and well-being so much easier. People go out for a run more often, people exercise more often, people are more social. So there are huge connections between environmental impact, feeling connected to the world through the Wi-Fi initial aspects to combat loneliness, but also in terms of well-being factors in terms of food, sunshine, vitamin D, and socialization as well. So there's a whole indirect correlation that's perhaps we haven't measured because we don't really have the tools to measure them yet. To be honest, I'd be happy if we just started measuring our emissions and our water usage first, and then we could track and see how much indirect impact we had against that one. I was just going
to say, Sonia, as well. There's also the arguments, in the technology space, particularly behaviourally, that the increasing reliance on technology is exclusionary to large parts of society as well. So that we have to recognise that sometimes we are leaving people behind, or people can't access technology. That those elements. And certainly as we increase the amount of data, increase the amount of bandwidth it needs to take to use some applications, we're excluding more and more people who maybe don't can't afford the data or can't afford the application to do it or have an older device. So again, like a focus on emissions and focus on sustainability, producing leaner applications can have benefits on that side of the fence as well, I would argue.
And we know that digital inclusion and the lack of digital skills are key parameters for the government as well that we as a company have to support going forward. There's a question from Aditya, probably to you, Gareth and Keith, on where can I access training on technology and sustainability? Here's another one you could have paid for earlier, Gareth.
No, so there's a load of training out there provisioned, some very basic sort of introduction to this topic. We provide very detailed training, so aimed at designers, engineers, architects, product owners, so the whole path, not a whole series of pathways, but I'm also, I want people to go and learn about the stuff. So there's also free stuff out. The Green Software Foundation offers free courses. The Linux Foundation, I think, offers a free course as well. So there are places to go and start your education and just raise awareness in this space. But if that piques your appetite and you want to kind of do a bit more, we offer full training pathways. And we're working alongside Sonia and the rest of the MASTEC team to provision that to as many people across the MASTEC organisation who want to take it. And certainly a good one of our great collaborations that we really enjoy is when we do some client training and we do some MASTEC training side by side. So educating the client and the people who are supporting them side by side. So we're leveling up all across the board.
And I think that's one of the things I just wanted to, sorry, Keith, if you don't mind if I'll do the MASTEC perspective, that's all right. I'll respond on your behalf. I apologise. This is where you might have to mute me instead, where we actually use Go Code Green to provide training for all our technical architects at Holdspring, and we're looking to procure the training programme for our BSA colleagues within the NHS and some of our Home Office colleagues. And again, that's where we're training our staff and the client staff at the same time, so we can together learn and move forward. So hopefully that answers your question, Aditya. There's a lovely comment from Katie, who says, by the way, it's great to see how this collaborative working between government, MASTEC and Go Code Green has delivered some important outcomes. Looking forward to see this step and repeating across the wider business. Well done all. So no answers to that one. We'll just thank her for that one. There's a question from Malika. What are some examples of ethical AI use? Gavin or Keith, do you want to go first and then Gareth can respond?
From my perspective, I think there's to see, it used to be an episode of Click on BBC Click probably a year or so ago. They're using it in the healthcare system when they're looking at cancers and things. So by the AI scanning various things, the material, that it was getting better and certainly taking the workload off of some of the specialist practitioners and doctors where there's a shortage of skills. And so the ethical use there, it could be one aspect of how it can be really used really effectively to free up doctors' time and specialists' time and see better use and better outcomes for patients in the long run. That's, yeah.
Thank you. That's a really good point as well, Keith.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the reverse of that to some extent, but in terms of, obviously there's a lot of concern, a lot of our services across public sector for all suppliers, there's a lot of person-centric elements to that. So, in terms of particularly introducing AI, there's a lot of focus on ensuring that we have things like ethical bias in our services. So that approach is maturing enormously from even a few years ago. So it's ensuring we've got the right guardrails and governance around the ethical use of each of those products as we apply them into each of the services. I think that's really critical for us going forward as part of the AI board and the strategy we're building out upon.
Gareth.
I think Gavin's example is great. I think and what was interesting about that particular study, and I actually was in the business that delivered some of that work, was that the combination of the AI plus the consultant ended up in far better clinical outcomes than just the consultant alone. So we're seeing that combination of technology and human delivering better outcomes, faster service for citizens. And better outcomes for them as well in terms of the clinical diagnosis side of things. I think the other one that we kind of forget, like AI is everywhere. Identity is a great example where we're seeing the shift to identity checking, know your customer in the financial services space, which previously meant somebody having to go into branch. or somebody had to go into a job centre or in other places where that's being done online. So understanding when the use of AI is going to mean not a 50-mile round trip for a pensioner, or and in some cases with the loss of some of these physical services, the offset in terms of time saved and miles saved is pretty significant. But we've understood that, we've measured it, like we understand that replacing this service with this service has this benefit in emissions, and I think that's the important point. That's what makes it ethical.
Thank you. Bear with me, it's quite a long question, so bear with me on this one. I think this is to Gavin and perhaps Gareth. A lot of the technologies that help with sustainability in IT are new and modern, and to Gareth's point, something we need to be thinking about at the beginning of the project. However, older technologies and kit may not necessarily lend themselves easily to improving sustainability. For example, one of the departments we work with is Defence. Given the large legacy, heritage investment that departments like these have made over several years, how can we help to make legacy IT greener, given the technology challenges? Gavin, did you want to talk about, I know that you can't talk about HMRC, but across the governmental board, whether they're part of it. And Gareth, did you want to comment about some of the work you're doing with the HMRC afterwards?
Sure.
Gavin.
Yeah, certainly we've got some pretty old technology in the Home Office. We look after the Police National Computer, which had its 50th birthday last year. Some of that tin is literally 50 years old and still spinning today and being used as a critical application. There is always a consideration about whether we replace those assets. So while there is a cloud-first strategy across government and view to put things straight into the cloud, there's always a weighing up of where the best place is, and cloud isn't always the answer. So there are elements that we want to sweat the elements of the assets longer. We want to ensure that we get the longer life. I know some of the teams that look at the procurement and everything are looking at the life cycle of that asset when they start a new service up. Where is it going to be hosted? How long is it, if we're purchasing tin or renting tin, how long is that going to sit? One of the advantages of going to the cloud is that headache's taken away, but it doesn't mean to say we can just ignore it. And I think that evaluation of where is it going to be hosted, what's the best technology to host it on is important. Where we've got an existing service, do we necessarily lift the ship, the whole thing? Do we transform it, and what we get the right balance? And the business case often takes it into consideration, and should always take that into consideration.
Thank you so much, Gavin.
Yeah, 100% fair. I think having moved into the environmental space relatively recently in the last 3 years, I always rely on my oldest friend, who's been doing it for 25 years, who always tells me that he's going to run his car into the ground until it dies, and then he's going to get a new one. And it's the same with this space. That old technology is still using it. So the cost of building it new is significantly more than the cost of continuing to run it. So our analysis, our measurement analysis, lifecycle analysis, we measure the cost to build, the cost to run, and the cost to update. So when we're looking at that, the cost to update and the cost to run it are significantly less than the cost of the update and cost to run it, significantly less than the original cost of build, always. So your opportunity to reduce is always going to be focused on the net new, so new releases, and the cost to run it. And there's all kinds of different things you can tweak in those areas, which reduce the impact of continuing to run that application. So again, training the engineers who are working on it to use more sustainable techniques in their next releases are things you can do. Looking at your release schedule, as it turns out, the more you release, the more efficient you get at releasing, and therefore you put yourself in a position where you're saving emissions by becoming more DevOps mature, for example, or allowing some of that techniques to be run on legacy applications. There are lots of things. Yes, you're definitely playing around the edges a bit more, but it doesn't mean you can't make an impact. And a lot of the work that we've done has been in financial services with a lot of those legacy applications. And when you look at the transaction volume on some of these old applications, if you make even a 5% difference per transaction and then aggregate that up over, in fact, billions of transactions, in some cases, particularly in the payment space, you certainly make a difference.
Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left on here, and I've got 2 more questions. We'll try and get through them in case there's any more that come through. This one is for you, Gareth. It's snuck into the chat group, so thankfully I saw it. It's from Samuel. You mentioned that a ChatGPT interaction has a simple question. For a simple question, has 10 times impact when compared to a Google search. These days, when we search on Google or Bing, etc., the LLM usually provides an answer at the start of the results. Does that have a similar effect to the above, or does Google's approach to providing the AI response work in a more efficient way?
There's a difference between asking Gemini a question in Gemini to asking to doing a Google search. In the same way, there's a difference between doing a Google search and asking ChatGPT a question. Gemini will be trained on Google searches. So effectively, it's a summary of answers from Google searches. And obviously, they've got 20 years of responses and that to train that model. So it's far less impactful. You can't turn on when you're logged into Google, you can't turn it on and off anyway. But because of the way they would have trained the model, it's much lower impact. Effectively, every time you're asking ChatGPT a question, you're asking it something new compared to using the aggregated results from Google searches.
That's actually made it a lot clearer for me as well. I appreciate that. So we've got one last question, which is probably going to be for all three of us. But if we start, or three of the presenters, not me, I promise. Keith, if we could ask you to respond to it first. It's a question from Tajinder, who says, how do we as Mastech move the dial forward with carbon emission reduction with our clients, and how can it be measured? So if we could start, and then Gavin could give it an aspect from the client, and Gareth in terms of measurement.
Yeah, I think the core for me for that is working very closely with partners and with the customer along that journey I mentioned earlier. I think there's a lot of aspects to this to take into consideration in terms of how you develop and mature out, how you implement these services and continue to evolve them. So I think it's a lot about the fundamental understanding, having the metrics to measure it as we go forward. And then, a collaborative viewpoint about how we're delivering, the best value, the optimal outcomes to deliver sustainability, but equally meeting, delivery commitments for the clients as well.
Thank you. As in terms of delivery commitment for the clients, Gavin, did you want to respond to that at all, or?
Yeah, so for us, we've got a challenge some ways. Clear. When we evaluate tenders and bids and things, we need to be calling out. We want these metrics to come in, so the requirements are written up front, and the suppliers know where they're going to be scored against. On the deliverable side, but also when they're tendering and bidding for the work. We need to be clear about our boundaries, and that's something that we sometimes struggle with in government. We want to make life easier for our suppliers in terms of when they're tendering. They could spend a huge amount of time tailoring their answer to how we're responding. And we want to measure apples with apples, oranges with oranges. And if we're not clear where the boundaries are between elements on the metrics, then it makes it very hard for our suppliers to send out responses in, to tailor their answers, and for us then to evaluate them. And then in the long run, for us to get what we want to across government, we need to do some work across government to be clear about where we want to measure boundaries for hosting, for transactional and whole life costs. Get all the elements clear, and that will help you guys when you're responding, and then help us all in the long run to get to the right answers.
Thank you. Gareth, your response in a minute, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, I think really quickly, long term, I see this being managed by projects having a carbon budget. We've got a pounds and pence budget. We'll have enough data to be able to predict where we should be from a carbon budget perspective, and ask people to manage that, so that we can use the predictive tools, and we can say we're going to use this much, and that to be measured and controlled and factored. It does all come back to measurement, and picking the right tools to do that, and making sure and challenging your suppliers. And I think what's great about what we're seeing in government and private sector lagging a little bit, in all honesty, is government are asking the right questions now. They're holding suppliers to account, and with new PPN number to be able to put into some of these applications, we're all going to be forced to have to consider it, sooner rather than later. So,
if I keep my thanks really neat, we have two more questions. So, Gareth, just in 30 seconds, a question from Jay. What is your opinion on the new milestone in generative AI space, agentic AI? What impact does that have on environment compared to normal prompt-based AI interactions?
So for me, agentic AI is really interesting. lots of discussion about it over the last 6 months, and our ability to manage, those agents. The prediction is that each human employee will have between 50 and 100 agents working for them, which is quite terrifying because I struggle to manage the 5 people I do. So imagine managing 100 bots. So then you're into the position where you're going to need something like guardian agents, and probably they are going to manage, and one of those guardian agents will be something like a sustainability agent who is checking that the other agents are doing things efficiently. That's probably where it's going to go. But again, governance frameworks, making sure you're not doing things without thinking about it, is critical in that space.
And I think that links back to what Keith was saying about the guardrails that we've got across the AI and the board, and the making sure we don't have bias. One last question, and I think, Gavin, this is probably for you. I'm just going to ask the rest of the question to save some time. How departments are ensuring that all suppliers, vendors are adhering to sustainable software engineering as part of SLDC?
I think there's elements of using best practice and shared practice. There's ISO accreditations that are available, and if a supplier signs up to those, they'll be audited in the same way for ISO 9001 for quality and environments and things. So there are elements that there's elements of trust in there as well. But if they are going through some sort of accreditation process and an external third-party vendor auditing them, that gives us greater confidence that the results they're presenting are correct.
Perfect, thank you. I think on that note, I'm going to end the webinar, but thank all 3 of you immensely. Huge thanks for your insights. I always learn more when I talk to each of you, and then collaborate even more when all 3 of you together. And I do think that's really the nugget to take away from here. None of us have the answers independently. We all have some of the answers, and we have a lot more of the problems, but working collaboratively, we can sort of help move the dial, as one of the questions actually asked, to actually change the future as we go forward. It has actually been my pleasure to do this. My contact details are within the Q&A and the chat facility. So if you have any additional questions, please do reach out to me, and we will make sure that that's supported, and we'll get the questions responded to by the presenters. So once again, huge thanks to Gavin, Keith, and Gareth. Do feel free on LinkedIn. This session has been recorded and it may be distributed. If you have any other issues with that, please do contact me. And if you want to learn any more at all about this area or anything else, please do reach out to any one of us. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, and hopefully see you next time. Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you. Bye.